Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. I know this is a little unconventional, but somewhat conventional for the times we are in. I wanted to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Emily, the Associate Grassroots Director at Teach NYS. And I just wanted to welcome you all to our webinar, Jewish Education in the Wake of COVID-19. To let you in on a little bit of what we've been doing throughout the summer, Teach NYS has been working with our lay leaders and elected officials to provide thousands of kosher meals throughout the state of New York for students and families, secure funding for iPads and Chromebooks, and make sure students can learn safely from their home. We couldn't really do any of this work without the partnerships of our great schools that we have on here today, and especially could not do this without our network members. So thank you all for tuning in. And if you are interested in getting involved in our network, please feel free to send me an email after this, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. We're so excited to be joined tonight by our four panelists to discuss the future of Jewish education and how we can navigate these uncertainties together. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our four panelists and moderator for the night. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Dr. Jeffrey Coburn. Rabbi Coburn is head of school at the North Shore Hebrew Academy in Great Neck, New York. He has a BA and MA in English Literature from Columbia University, a PhD in English Education from Teachers College, and Smicha from Rabbi Zalman, Nehemiah Goldberg, and Raizi. Rabbi Coburn has published numerous articles and columns in the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, Ten Da'at, the Torah Umada Journal, and elsewhere. Next, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Jeffrey Rothman, who oversees both the elementary school and Joel Braverman High School, as well as the executive office functions of finance, tuition, operations, security, development, public relations, and marketing administration technology at Yeshivah Flatbush. Rabbi Rothman has been integral in bridging the elementary school and high school, engaging lay leaders, expanding fundraising efforts, and advocating with local politicians for funding of non-public schools via Teach NYS. Rabbi Rothman spent all of his previous 17 years of work experience improving Jewish day schools. Rabbi Rothman is a graduate of Yeshivah University with a BS in Business Management, Rabbinic Ordination, and Doctor of Education in Administration and Supervision. He also holds a Master's in Public Administration from New York University's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Raizi. Sorry if I pronounce this wrong. Is it Chechik? How do you pronounce it properly?
That's perfect.
Great. Who's head of school at Manhattan Day School. She's a creative and dynamic educator who brings to her position over 2 decades of school leadership experience and a passion for learning and teaching. She studied Tanakh and counseling at Michlachla Jerusalem Teachers College and holds an MA in Jewish history and has done doctoral work in both education and Jewish studies. Raizi is a recipient of numerous professional and academic awards, among them the National Grinspoon Steinhardt Award for Excellence in Jewish Education. A graduate of the intensive training program for day school leaders at Yeshivah University, she served as a mentor to new school leaders through the Principals Partnership Program and continues to support new principals and heads of school. Finally, our last panelist this evening is Maury Litwack. As founder and executive director of the Teach Coalition, Maury has grown the organization from a single staffer to a multi-state network responsible for securing record amounts of state funding to non-public schools. Maury leads Teach Coalition's advocacy on the most critical issues for schools and families, including the priority issues of school security as well as tuition subsidies and families, including the STEM advancement and health and nutrition programs. He has also published numerous articles. Prior to joining the Orthodox Union, Litwack was a federal affairs lobbyist for Miami-Dade, the 6th largest county in the nation. He also served as a legislative staffer in the United States Congress, specializing in foreign affairs and education policy. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Sydney Altfield. Sydney serves as the Director of Grassroots Engagement for Teach NYS. In less than a year, Sydney has spearheaded our network of activists and has grown the movement from 5 members to a full-fledged network of over 100 community activists. Prior to joining the Teach NYS team, Sydney served as a development fellow at APAC, and she is honored to be moderating this panel comprised of intelligent educators and fierce fighters for a better Jewish education system. Before I hand it over to Sydney, I wanted to mention the question and answer button that should be at the bottom of your screen. If at any time throughout the night you have any questions on what we're speaking about, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box, and towards the end of the webinar, I will pose the questions accumulated throughout the night to our panelists and get you all your answers. If we don't get to your question, feel free to email it to me at the same email you RSVP'd for tonight, and we will make sure to get you an answer. So with that, I give it to Sydney.
Thank you for that great introduction. And again, thank you all for joining us tonight. As in my bio, I'm honored to be moderating this panel comprised of some of the best educators and fighters for affordable, quality Jewish education. Of course, thank you all to our watchers out there watching this tonight, but also a very big thank you to our panelists who have taken the time from their very busy last few days of summer. We're very truly thankful for you to have a lot to get to tonight. So let's jump right in. So we've all heard this phrase over and over again, unprecedented times. This phrase has been thrown out around every news station, every email, in our everyday lives. And what does this phrase actually mean? So when I looked it up in the dictionary of unprecedented, the meaning says never done or known before. So I was thinking about it, never done. And how does that fit into the Jewish education and what we're talking about today? What steps have the schools taken that have never been done before? And how can we turn these unprecedented times into precedented times into the future? And that is exactly where we're going to start tonight. I'm going to start the first question to Rabbi Coburn. As you were one of the first schools to close its doors back on March 11th, can you walk us through your transition to virtual learning? And Raizi and Rabbi Rothman, please follow up with your experiences as well.
It's an honor to be here among such august company. And Maury and I have been doing this together for a very long time, so it's fun to be here with you and with my friends, Rabbi Dr. Rothman, there we go, and Raizi and Emily and Sydney, and thank you for this opportunity. The canary in the coal mine in the Coburn family were my own children who were SAR students who went dark even earlier than we did in Great Neck. So I was able personally to learn a lot just from their experience and watch what SAR did. And I would say that SAR has really been not by choice, but they were really the model for a lot of us as the schools watched how do we do things and what should we do and how do we do it, because they actually had to go first. We were one of the first on Long Island, and a lot of this was very tenuous and rumor driven, and we had heard stories. This was the week of Purim, which I'm sure everyone remembers well, and we had heard that there was someone in a community nearby who may have been exposed. At this point, like anyone who was a positive case was like they had they had sarat, they were a leper, and we would have to like stay as far away from them as possible. And there might be some chance that maybe someone had possibly been exposed to someone who'd been exposed to that person who'd been exposed to that person, and we should probably shut down out of an overabundance of caution. I will tell you, so the connections that we had, thanks to Teach, I'll plug shamelessly. The connections we had thanks to Teach New York State were very, very helpful, but the state was still figuring it out themselves at that time, and they couldn't give us specific guidelines. They would say, well, this is what you might want to do, but it's really up to you. So we had to make a decision late into the night. I think it was the night before Shushan Purim. No, Purim was our last day in school, and we decided that we have to close just, and we'll see, and we thought that would be for a week or two, and that turned into till now. But it was something that we had to just do on the fly. A lot of help was what was very helpful had with other colleagues like Jeff Rothman, like Raizi Chechik, other people, other school leaders, that we all learned from each other. But it was hairy.
And Raizi, Rabbi Rothman, do you want to touch on your transition?
Sure. Echo what Rabbi Coburn said and just kind of highlight that historically schools that have offered either an online or a hybrid model have done so with significant lead time and planning, right? With time to conceptualize, hiring mission-aligned staff, training that staff, attracting families that are looking for a virtual model. And all of us were sort of thrown into this with that. We had at least some staff members who may have been excellent in the classroom, but at best unskilled in these modalities. We had families who did not opt in for this, and all of us had a small to significant subset of children who really aren't as suited to this sort of learning. And I think it's like a huge credit to all of our stakeholders collectively, that we succeeded at least in the way we did. And I would echo as well the plug for Teach NYS, but the legislative advocacy that you had been doing for years to bolster rich STEM programming, and particularly in the technology realm, landed up being a godsend in ways that we hadn't anticipated, because that was one of the variables that really contributed to our robust STEM program. So kindergarten and up, through a spiraled program, learned robotics and then coding, and had familiarity with technology in a way that when we had to shift to virtual instruction, the bulk of our staff and all of our students had a greater level of familiarity than I would say would have been the case otherwise. So go and share this.
So I would add something that, for me, it's a little bit hard to think back already all those months, because I'm thinking about what we've gone through since. I think the part that was probably most challenging for everyone, from kids to teachers to parents, was just most of us have never lived through a period of uncertainty in the moment the way we did at that time. And, I spent a lot of time, much more than I normally do in my role, reaching out to parents who were out of work, out of jobs, and, managing, like they had no clue what was going to be. And thank God many of them now are in a totally different place. But the point really was, at the time, they just had no idea. And I think the key that I would like to pick out, Sydney, from your point about unprecedented times, and maybe something that we can all take even further into the future, is I really think what Teach NYS is about is really about the partnership and the collaboration. And I think Rabbi Coburn and Ms. Chechik touched on both of those. I think for us, there's a term out there in leadership that a lot of people use called, radical flexibility. And that's kind of been our phraseology we've been using. And I think that's really what this is about. It's, parents, like right now, what we're all dealing with. On the one hand, we all spent much of June and early July figuring out how to old school and could we, and we had all the parents who want school open for all the right reasons. And then we were dealing with, once we announced school was open, all the parents who, well, really, should we open school? Is it safe enough to open school? And I think it's one of those things that we always have in our school, which is lots of different voices and lots of different viewpoints. And I think it's only through collaboration with our own community as well as other communities that, the communication and partnership with our parents, it's something I've been saying to parents. I've seen a bunch of different rabbis write about this in recent blog posts. Jewish education certainly is a business, but it cannot be treated regularly as a business. And if we look at it as a business transaction, then we're in for a very hard time in terms of how to handle when we're in uncertain times like this. So I think, the ability for schools and parents to partner with each other, to really understand that everyone's out for the best interest of every child, is something that clearly every educator, certainly I know my fellow panelists here, are something they talk about all the time, but I think it's even more important, in a time like this where, we all just have to be even more flexible than maybe we even knew we could.
Definitely, and we're going to touch on that collaboration a little on. But before we get there, I work with a lot of people in the communities, and I hear a lot of things. One thing that I did hear, and I do want to touch on it on this panel, is how incredibly flexible, like you said, your schools were, all of our schools. And I want to talk about what positives did you see come out of virtual learning that you didn't think you would see? What, we have some high schools here, middle schools, both. What were some things, because I've heard that you all, and a lot of our schools watching, did an amazing job at adapting. So what were those positive things that helped you with the edge and making sure that your students were really well prepared in going to this new unprecedented time? And I'll turn that over to Raizi, and then you can all jump in.
Sure. Well, there are so many layers to that question, but one of the things I'm hearing in it is sort of a positive that emerged from this. And we can all speak to this instructionally, right? There are, I think, methods of assessment and individualized learning that we've all acquired during this time that we can take with us back, and God willing, to a post-COVID world and a non-virtual world. But I'd actually like to respond in a different way that's somewhat counterintuitive when I think of things we take with us from this time that are positive. Fascinatingly, it forced us to rethink how we create and sustain and enhance community, right? And it's fragmented. So one instance, many of us as day school educators found that the information, particularly in the early weeks, that was coming at us was fragmented and not fully coherent and disparate. And we started a weekly call with about 20 heads of school throughout the New York area from a wide range of schools, you know, in terms of affiliation, sharing information, strategizing together. The moderator of that call is actually Rabbi Coburn. Most of the other participants are New York City schools. And it created a level of community among heads of school that I certainly hope we will take with us beyond, like a beautiful model of collaboration and synergy. On a level within our school, in our Manhattan facility, we do not have one room large enough to really hold our entire school community, certainly not to include parents and grandparents. So the events we do tend to be smaller scale. Tefillot that were so powerful. I'm thinking of Yom HaAtzmaut, when we had all of our children from early childhood through 8th grade, all of our parents, grandparents, a musician leading the Hallel. It was probably one of the most powerful tefillot that I've ever had. And to think of ways that we could continue to build community like that. We've brought in grandparents for monthly lectures. And in a time when grandparents weren't seeing their grandchildren, we have a sort of Hebrew Jewish kinder dance that we do once a week. We invited grandparents to come on and sing along with and watch their grandchildren, just in ways that fostered like layers of connection and affiliation that we did not have before. So when I think about our community in schools, I hope that we take with us these lessons that we sort of through the cauldron of fire we acquired, and that, you know, they better us as individual schools and as a community moving forward.
I'll jump onto that. What was neat was, and Rabbi Rothman, you touched on this, everybody helping each other out. So if a teacher, first of all, I'll state unequivocally, Zoom does not work for every child every day, even when all the technology works. Especially, we saw this more in the younger grades than the upper grades. The older the kids get, the more they're able to sit, the more they're able to focus. But that's not a real, you know, that should be pretty obvious to everyone. But we would have moments where the teachers, there was a thunderstorm like Maury had a few minutes ago. There's a thunderstorm in their house. They lost their Wi-Fi, and the teacher all of a sudden disappeared from the screen. And a parent who was there would just pop in and start going over the homework. And no one, that would never happen in school. The teacher would never allow that type of invasion in school and would feel so unprofessional, and everyone just rolled with it. And that is a tremendous, and no one held it against the teacher, and the parent felt great about themselves, and the kids thought it was really fun. It just gelled. And that is something I would love, that feeling and that collaboration, I'd love to be able to take with us when, God willing, we get out of this. That's one piece. I think teachers learned a lot and surprised themselves a lot. The ones who thought, I'm never, you know, who would be dragged kicking and screaming to any professional development and said, well, the technology thing, that's very nice, but you know that's something I can take on. I don't think that's, and they modeled the learning for their students because they had to. I mean, there's an author, Wall Street Journal reporter and author, Charles Duhigg, who writes about, have a book called The Power of Habit. He says habits usually take 3 or 4 weeks to form. Well, you didn't have 3 or 4 weeks to get good at this. You had like 3 or 4 days, and the teachers were able to get there. So between the collaboration piece on the family end and the support and everyone understanding that everyone's learning and everyone's figuring this out together, and sometimes teachers would have their own kids, you know, running to the back of the frame because they were stuck at home too. Modeling of learning that the teachers did for their own kids, I think it was a very powerful time. And I don't want to lose that sense of we're all learning together, not just we're all in this together.
So I would just add two things. One, which I think was touched on, I would just use a little bit different of a word to describe it. I think our teachers and administrators were pushed to learn a new level of creativity that perhaps they didn't have or didn't have to use before. Different things before school, after school, evenings. I saw in our school, many more evening events just because we needed to engage families, younger kids, night activity. It was almost like we were talking as camp counselors, planning, a camp event. So I think, and that obviously rolled over into educational things too, not just fun social things, which were obviously crucial at the time. So I think creativity is something that, perhaps some people were pushed beyond their normal limits, and hopefully they'll be able to capture those and, continue those into the future. The other one, which is kind of what I see as for sure the parts of the Zoom piece that we'd like to continue, and obviously we would hope to never have to do again because we'd like to be in person, but I think the ability to connect to people. I know for myself, I spend a lot of time talking to parents and staff during the summer. That's just about all I do. And even though I'm not sure how my esteemed panelists would take to the idea of getting rid of all phone calls with parents and turning everything into a Zoom call, I think we would all agree that there is a certain element of that would be far more beneficial and effective in terms of the communication if you're able to see the person, who you're talking to, which I find personally challenging when it's a phone call, especially if perfectly. Again, I've got 1,000 parents in my school, so maybe it's a different challenge that I have. But I think that's something that, in terms of really connecting at certain times, we've had staff get together in the evenings for a meeting at times when we would never ask them to ever get together. But they now know we could do it for 20 minutes in an evening, and that might impact not having to utilize time during the day in a different way. So I think there are certainly lots of areas, and I've only just touched on a little of the Zoom capability that I think we really all could continue bringing out even when we are hopefully all in person for learning.
Yeah, I can definitely attest that phone calls that used to be phone calls have now turned into Zoom just because that's the norm, and seeing people. And I think because we can't really see people in person, we yearn for that communication, that face to face. So you're finding yourself Zooming more often than you ever probably would have seen people in person. So that's a great point. It's not just, it's in every day of life now. So now that we've touched on how your school's adapted back in March and how it's helped you prepare for the future, let's go back to now the beginning of summer. Everything's in disarray, at least on a funding side for your institutions, whether it's fundraising decreasing or what we're really here to talk about is government funding and where does that stand. And let's go back to that word of unprecedented. For those of you on here that don't know, it's very quiet. The budget is signed in the beginning of April, and then come June, July, session comes to an end. But again, we're back at that word, unprecedented times. So Maury, I'm going to turn to you for this question, and I know that others have experiences in this as well, so feel free to chime in. But can you speak about how, unlike any other year, educators, community members all banded together to meet with legislators during their summer vacation, and walk us through what those conversations look like?
The pleasure to be with the three educators who either testify or speak at every teach event that we have in New York. So it's nice to see our great educators who are not on our payroll but probably should be. So the point that we've been making to legislators, and the activists on the call who are listening also know this, and are great educators who've been participating on it, is that as Rabbi Coburn mentioned early in March, we were the first schools actually to close down, and people know the history of it. Not just the non-public schools, the Jewish schools literally were the first ones to be asked to close down, and they did. And then in advance of that, in advance of the public school closure, many people returned after to see their, and the city schools took longer than that to do that, for example. So when there comes to reopening, it's not like we have a choice to sort of go it alone. There's regulations, there's requirements, there's guidance as well. So our argument to the elected officials really stems from the fact that when it came to government closures, we had to be in compliance. When it came to government reopening, we have to be in compliance. So what happens when it comes to bailouts? What happens when it comes to the money that actually we attribute all of these costs to? The public school community estimates that they have to spend about $2,400 to $2,600 a child in reopening costs. And when we did our own analysis of our costs for the Yeshivah system, it ran $1,000 plus per child. And that doesn't include all of the costs that the schools have borne to this point. It talks about just the reopening costs of everything from if you saw, by the way, we posted on our social media, I posted on my social media this video of after getting its reopening done, and you just see people sawing and cleaning and getting ready, and I'm sure all the schools have video like that. It's born that have to be accounted for. And in addition to that, there's all these technological costs and that schools expended. I mean, I can't even tell you how many schools would call us up and say, well, if the state or city isn't going to provide the iPads, we're going to pay for the money ourselves to do that. And so those are the discussions that we've been having with elected officials, which is the fact that if the state and the federal government does not come in a more serious way and pay for these things, not just for the non-public school community, but for education as a whole, for public schools, charters, etc., the educational system in America, you are leaving kids behind because the product is not going to be the same product with the cost being expended the way they are. So those are the conversations that we're having, but it's very, very important for community members. I'll just reference that everyone, I'm sure, saw the Jerry Seinfeld article about not leaving New York City, and I could think of the same thing when it comes to those opining and pontificating that Jewish education is, about to fall off a cliff. I don't think Jewish education is about to fall off a cliff, but I do think that the inherent responsibility here to help the educational system that has, for the first time ever, been placed on a complete equal footing, that we all had to close down and we all have to expend tremendous costs to reopen and protect our teachers and our children.
And I want to turn now, because of these meetings that Maury was talking about, I believe, and I know I'm right, all three of our panelists have been on these summer meetings with legislators during the summertime when they're supposed to be off or wedding plans. They've been meeting with legislators, with community members as well. So I'm going to turn to Rabbi Rothman and kind of take us through that experience of, you never really thought you would be using your summertime pleading for funding from the government, and not even just pleading, but speaking to them of what's going on in your community.
Sure. So, I mean, as Sydney knows, because she's been in our school, in our office, numerous times over the last couple of years, working with Teach NYS, we've brought in, I'm not even sure how many, at least 6 to 8 different politicians to tour the school, let them show the school, let them see what a Jewish school's about. I've had a couple of them say, Rabbi, I've never been in a Jewish school in my life, and she lives in New York City, this particular person. And that's kind of been how we've been working in our partnership. And we're doing it for obviously a number of reasons. Number one, because Maury says we're supposed to. And 2, because Maury says it will help us for state funding, which I think we've already seen happen. But in all seriousness, I think real relationships have been born from those meetings. One small example, we had a senior in our school last year who got nominated for an award, a very prestigious one in New York City, that could only be nominated by a politician. And because there was a politician, an assemblyman who I have met with now probably half a dozen times and talked to, he thought of us and nominated this person this child. And so there is really a lot more than just these visits, and a number of the people we are in touch with. So I think when it came time for the early part of the summer, I think I was on 3 such calls, if I remember correctly. They were all with people who knew me and knew most of the people on the call, because similarly we've had met with them. And I think that's, you know, the relationships that Teach NYS is all about. It's about helping politicians really understand what a non-public school looks like, so that they can really fight for it for all of the right reasons. And I think those calls, the fact that they were on Zoom was a little bit helpful. I'll be, you know, I could have done them from anywhere. If I'm at home, or, you know, I don't know, at an empty baseball stadium, I don't know. But the point is, I think, you know, really it was a friendship. It was a communication of a partnership. And I really do believe that as those politicians grow with the school, it could only, you know, benefit, you know, the schools that we're all working towards.
And aside from these relationships building, there's definitely some work that has to be done and things that have to be asked for during these meetings, during these times. So Raizi, I don't think you need to go into too much detail of, you know, all the numbers and all that, but talk about some of the asks that were happening in these meetings of money, and what does that look like? Technology, air conditioning, and all these things that now you have to think of.
So, you know, just to step back for a moment, one of the things I've always valued about working with Teach NYS is how a level and a micro level. So like in the pre-COVID era, the macro level looked like legislation, and the micro level meant someone from your staff coming and helping us fill out forms to optimize funding for our school. And I find that during COVID, in the relational space with our legislators, it's the same way. On the macro level, you know, you invited us to this call with over a dozen other schools in New York with the governor's office. It allowed us both to have voice within policy and to shape policy, and at the same time to have access. We could then better inform what was happening in our schools. And then on the micro level, in our neighborhood, we faced a particular security challenge, and I called Sydney, and within 24 hours we had a meeting with our assemblywoman, and that voice was really instrumental in being able to open up schools safely. So on the broader level, being able to ask for the funding we need is significant. But on a micro level, for every issue that rises, being able to capitalize on these relationships that we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to cultivate, and you're taking care of that for us.
I'll throw some numbers, and I'll tell my favorite story, my favorite Maury Litwack story, which I don't even know if he knows. But thanks to the involvement of Teach NYS, North Shore a year ago got more than $60,000 just on our elementary school in STEM funding from the state, which we were able to use, as we now have to equip every classroom with all kinds of tech to be able to allow any student who's home to be able to zoom into class and know what's going on, not miss anything out. Hopefully they'll all be there in real life, but if they have to stay home for whatever reason, we want them to be as much a part of the experience as they can. If we need to, God forbid, close down again, we're going to be able to equip every teacher's house with everything that they need. Again, that's technology dollars at work. We got $42,000 in, thanks to the state CARES grant, which Teach NYS was helpful in connecting us with as well. These are all real dollars that we've spent. I did a little back of the envelope calculator. We have spent nowhere near $2,400 a student, even though I think we've spent a fortune of money on stuff that I'm going to throw in the garbage, God willing, in as soon as possible. And if you want to be in the polycarbonate recycling business in about 10 months, there's a little hot tip for you. The week phones were ringing and everything was going crazy. My phone lit up and it's Maury, and I answered because I always answer when Maury calls. This is always good advice at the end. He said, do 2 things right now. Keep a record of every penny that you're spending for all this stuff, which we have been doing, and call your local representatives with whom we already have relationships thanks to Teach NYS. I spoke to Laura Curran, who is the county executive of Nassau County. He said, listen, anything we can do, we're here for you. And Anna Kaplan, who is our state senator. And she said the same thing, and all is well. Flash forward to about 3 weeks ago, there was that terrible storm. It was a tornado, you know, everyone lost power. in my neighborhood here in Riverdale, there were people who were out for a week to 10 days with no electricity. Our school, which was in the process of setting up to get reopened, had no electricity. And it was the point in Great Neck where people were literally chasing down the PSE&G trucks to try to flag them down to get help for their own homes. And we couldn't get anyone to come to the school. We have all kinds of, without getting too graphic, we had issues that had to be addressed, or there would be sewage all over the building. Someone said, why don't you call Anna Kaplan, who had come to visit our school thanks to a Teach NYS connection. I called her office. Within 2 hours, I had a call back from her chief of staff. Within 3 or 4 hours, a truck pulled up at the building, and this happened, Maury, I didn't even tell you this. And the PSE&G guy said, the rabbi called the senator and said we should come over here. And the lights went back on. So that happened because of our connection to Teach NYS and that connection that they fostered with the state senator. That's clear to me. So we have much to be thankful for, and it works.
That's an amazing story. Like
you were supposed to, he was supposed to use those for his own personal use when his power or his sewage, he had sewage problems. He was not supposed to use those connections for the school. So he's just not as political as we want him to be in New York.
I should tell me that.
Those are examples, and we love the work that we do, and we do it for not just you and your schools, but for all schools around New York. But Maury, I'm going to go to you and say, why is it so important that these conversations are happening now if there's really no decisions making happening now, nothing's really going on, it's kind of at a standstill? Why is it so important that these legislative relationships are building and growing for that when something should happen? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, so the best way to describe this is that a famous phrase in politics, which is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And it's very important for people, very important for our schools to understand that, because we've been on calls with elected officials, and I think every one of the educators and the activists know these types of calls that we've had recently, where it basically is elected officials saying to us, well, the state's broke, which the state is broke. The state has $10 billion deficit plus. But the public school educational system has major problems. The charter schools have major problems. They are at the table right now saying education to make sure there's not, the number one issue is getting our kids back where they should be educationally. And we can all agree that working remotely is not the ideal. And so they're already there. They're already having those conversations. And if we wait until the state of New York gets more federal funding, which they're talking about, or we wait till there's a state package, we will not be at the table, and we will not have that conversation. So, and as an example of that, just from, we obviously have the offices in other states also. In New Jersey, the counterparts there had their own meetings about that, having those conversations, and lo and behold, the state of New Jersey is borrowing $10 billion, which I don't think is going to happen in New York, but who knows. And the governor in New Jersey proposed a budget today where he increased security funding. He actually increased funding by $25 a child in security funding for every yeshiva kid and non-public school kid in New York State, in New Jersey. So when you see that and you watch that happen, I don't think that would have been happening if we hadn't been having similar conversations early on. Whereas when we're having those conversations with our New Jersey counterparts, they were telling the politicians were telling the educators then, well, there's no money and we're not gonna be able to get any money. But our educators and our activists kept saying, yes, we get that, but we want to be in line. We want to be at the table. We want you to understand that these are issues, which is why Rabbi Coburn kept an accounting since March, beginning of March, of everything that happened over to legislators and let them understand, like safety and security, which we should not be paying for because increased rise in anti-Semitism is not expenditure our schools or our community should be bearing. Similarly, COVID-19, a global pandemic, doesn't discriminate between public and non-public school children, and we should not be expending the cost for that.
Those are great points, and it's great to hear about the success in New Jersey. Now, hopefully that puts the fire under all of us watching here on the call, we can make yours. So that's just going to make everyone in New York want to work even harder. So that was a nice plug. But I want to continue with the summer months. So we went from March to school closings to learning throughout the year, to them shutting down and having phone calls and meetings with legislators. But now I want to talk about the next part of summer, which is preparing to open. We spoke about, Rabbi Rothman spoke about collaboration and how it's helped him, and spoke about how he hopes that it continues. But let's talk about what's been happening. And like you said, schools are collaborating more than ever. And I'm going to turn this over to Rabbi Coburn at first, because Raizi kind of threw him under the bus there, saying that he ran one of these calls. So I'm going to turn it over to you first, and let your other counterparts answer after. But how has that collaboration been going on? How has that been working? And can you give us some insight onto the collaboration and how that's kind of formed?
The whole story is this group was started by a different educator who subsequently moved to a southern state. And then Raizi secretly said to me, you should take over this call and control this, because everyone is just like all over the place. So we staged a kind of secret coup and took it over. So she's really the power behind the throne. And now all 27 attendees know that. When we're on these calls, sometimes I will find that Raizi and I know things that other schools, because they're just not members of Teach NYS, they come, they're all from all different denominations. There's stuff they don't know because they have not been on the calls that you have helped set up. He's A. But that's part of the Teach NYS plug part. What's been super helpful is seeing that everyone is in the same boat, that everyone's trying to figure it out. Different people have different needs. I mean, I'm in a less urban setting, so we have fields that we can think about putting tents in. And the urban schools, the city schools, don't have options like that. And I know Raizi's been talking to local shuls and synagogues and finding spaces there. But we can learn from each other. What policies are you putting in? What are your parents? What are you having? 2 weeks ago, I think the big query: yes, no, why, what's good, what's bad. Everyone has an opinion, and what we're able then to do is bring back to our own constituent group to say, listen, we're on with 10 schools or 15 schools once a week, and this is, most people think that's nuts, or most people think this is a great idea, whatever it is. And there's also a power in, so there's a power in, in a group opinion. That's the word. That's been very helpful, and we're all learning from each other, because, like, I can't remember who said it anymore, but when you talk about unprecedented, there's no one around from 1918 to ask how they did this the last time. So we're all kind of muddling our way through it together. But even just knowing that someone else has the exact same questions you have and doesn't have good answers to them can be incredibly simple.
I want to turn to something that Raizi touched on earlier, was the task force and the reopening task force. And I know that the schools have their own, but Teach NYS put together a group of voluntary schools that wanted to do some more collaboration. And we got you on a call with the governor's office, and you helped facilitate those conversations. And kind of being on that call, what did you learn, and how was that helpful? And what really came out of it from that first day that you got the guidance, and what do we do next?
So maybe I'll respond to this. I'd never heard the phrase Maury used before, that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. It's stark, but I suppose it's apt. And it deepens my gratitude for your bringing us to the table now that I know the full extent of the alternative. But we were all struggling, collectively with the late nature of when information was released. Like, we did not open our camp because I think it was June something that camp guidelines came out. We planned months in advance, while trying to figure out how to set up our schools absent data. So being able to be on a call where we could give voice to our needs, and which I think helped shape, right, some of the discourse following, but also have access to data earlier. As Jeff said, we've shared it with the broader day school community. It has been a salvation for us, financially, structurally, procedurally, in terms of being able to make plans. And while what comes out ultimately may be slightly different and we may need to tweak, it gives us a direction in this vast space, of the unknown and the unprecedented.
Great. And going back to my opening remarks, on the unprecedented time and what you just said, and how we can turn these unprecedented times into precedented times. Before you know it, schools are, you're all going to be opening your doors, and everything from A to Z. How are you now prepared for if your school should close or have to close again? Rabbi Rothman, if you want to take that one.
Sure. So, you know, I think Rabbi Coburn mentioned this before, many of us jumped into this with very little, if any, preparation. I think it was after Purim, we had school that Thursday. Friday, we had a professional development day for our teachers, which was really more about just getting everyone to talk and probably a little bit of professional development too. But it was really just to get everyone in a room and figure out what we're about to do, or at least what we knew at that time, what we thought would be. So I think we've certainly had a huge amount of professional development over the summer. We always do. We have a professional development institute for our teachers over the summer. We happen to have partnered with Prisma this year and opened it up to some other schools, and had about 15 other schools that joined us. So our teachers are definitely preparing. Although we all hope that we're never in that, you know, spot, I do think we all could be pretty much ready to click a button and revert back. I think the part that teachers are probably spending more time on now, which is probably much more difficult than teaching remotely, is teaching partially remotely and partially in person, relating to all the costs, putting in cameras and microphones and all different kind of devices into the classroom. You know, it's very different as a teacher, you know, to have half of her room in person, part of the room at home, one or two children at home for whatever medical reasons. So I think that's even more difficult, and I think our teachers are trying to be prepared for strategies around that as best as humanly possible, because I don't think there is a perfect solution to that. But I think that's the part that we're focused on now. And then we're just davening that we don't end up with everybody at home again, for all the reasons we all know.
And what can one of you, either Raizi or Rabbi Coburn or Rabbi Rothman, whoever wants to take this one, because I'm sure you all can you give us a little bit of insight? You don't have to give us your entire 100-page plan, which I'm sure it is, but a little insight on what people can expect. What does the school look like? I know Maury spoke about Hafter and cutting chainsaws and building things and kind of rearranging a classroom. Just give us a few tidbits of what parents can expect coming back to school.
I think this is probably identical, you know, amongst all of us. But I will share that today I got an email from a principal in Dallas, I believe it was, weeks ago, and it was so reassuring to read. He said, I want you to know you're also anxious about opening school and little children coming into the building, walking through scanners without parents allowed, wearing masks, sitting apart behind dividers. He said, we started with our early childhood, a gentle rollout, and I just want to reassure you that the beginning of school has been beautiful, and children are resilient, and children are adaptive, and they come in smiling underneath their masks, so their desk is situated this way instead of that way, or there's a cute little tent around it, or there's not, or we're having fun and picnicking on the roof because we're not eating in the cafeteria, but that the adaptivity and resilience of children and of communities of positivity is something not to be understated. So I think all of us are looking at obviously very significantly different health measures than we've had before, and it is unprecedented, but I think what, God willing, is precedented is that all of us are looking toward a year of learning and inspiration and growth and joy, and that will be identical with whatever external trappings look different.
I think it's very important. When one of our calls in after Pesach, probably schools are reopening. So we had a colleague of ours who had made Aliyah, an American person who now runs a school in Israel. And one of the points, and he went through all the things that we're now doing in our schools with the dividers and the masks and the washing hands every interval. He said the anticipation and anxiety beforehand is so much worse than the actual execution. And we the educators preparing, and we the parents who are on shpokas, and we're all in that anticipation stage. It's like right before Pesach starts, and you're still running around, and everyone's screaming in the house, not in your houses, but in other houses that I've heard of. And then it starts, and the Seder starts, and it's beautiful, and it works. And not everything is perfect, and you roll with it, and that is, God willing, what will be our experience in a week or two when we actually open those doors and the kids come in. And I do think they will be that way, because the kids cannot wait. We had a bunch of our kids come visit yesterday. We were working on a promotional video to show parents and kids what to expect and what it'll be. And they're so excited just to be back at school. They can't wait. And that energy, and the teachers can't wait either. Once they keep them healthy and safe, they're excited to be there. Then they're anxious, and they're not sure, how am I going to teach wearing a mask, and how am I going to do it, and how am I going to keep the kids, all that stuff. And we'll get through that. But the anticipation, the anxiety is just, we'll get through all that, and then we'll start, and it'll be fabulous.
You can really feel not just that it's your day-to-day job, but the warmth and the love and the compassion that comes through with all three of these educators. And I know that it echoes across New York State with our Jewish institutions, yeshivas, and day schools. So it's amazing to hear it in person, the best in person we can get it. So it's really amazing to hear that compassion that, yes, we want our schools to be functioning, but it's really about the students at the end of the day, and are they having a good feeling at what's to come. So as everyone can see, that these school administrators are very hard at work planning for reopening, new policies, procedures. But then we have Maury, who at this time would probably be running around New York, but instead is popping in and out of Zoom meetings, like we said earlier. He's taken on this task to be the halls of local and state government. And we've really seen that work has changed. As we spoke about, these meetings are happening in the summer, and they've never happened in the past, really, that time. So I'm going to turn to you, Maury, and say, what do you see different in your work to fight for Jewish education as we move into this during COVID, post-COVID time?
Well, I just want to make sure that we clarify, because it's very kind that I know that I'm seen as running around different state capitals, but I look at it more as a conductor, which is the ideal version of what Teach NYS is about. Is that a Rabbi Coburn or Raizi takes the relationships that we make and introductions to, and then stores them and goes from there. And I know the assemblywoman that she was referring to, or that he was referring to, the state senator, and taking those relationships, stewarding them, and then creating this into a movement. You don't see the state be represented by one person or two people sort of running around and doing that. And I get no greater nachas than knowing that not just the educators on this call have those personal relationships, or Rabbi Rothman can call. I mean, they literally each told a story about their relationship with the elected official and being able to reach out and do that. That gives me incredible nachas, because I think Rabbi Coburn's the educator I worked with the longest on the teach stuff. Is he knows that when we started this with 5-6 schools, there really wasn't any kesher. And when we used to go to local meetings and ask who knows their state and local elected officials, literally no one could raise their hand and knew them. So it just gives me a lot of joy knowing that our educators of these leading institutions know their local elected officials, interact with them, their local elected officials want to interact with them, and they oftentimes are not going any more to me, but they're actually going directly there. And I think that's really the vision of our movement and what we want to do. And so to me, that's really about, I believe that because of COVID-19, it's created a situation where we don't have to get through all the scheduling logistics to get the educators on the call. It's a lot easier to do that if we want to do that. And I think we just people need to understand that if they take the time to do that, they're really now on a level playing field, that they don't have to schlep up to Albany on one of our early 5:30, 6 a.m. buses, which again, all people here have done. But they really can do this now and have those conversations. And people also have to understand that COVID is the unifying it's an equalizer, which is, it used to be, we went up there and said, do you know that we pay tuition? Or do you know that our kids are on scholarship? Or do you know that I worry about this late at night? And that was a unique feeling. Now it's, yeah, COVID hit us. COVID hits you, elected official. And that's really what we have to start continuing to permeate. And in order to do that, we need the activists and the educators and everyone else to continue making this into a movement and of shared responsibility to tell that story, but doing it in a climate which I think is much easier to do because we're just like everybody else in this situation, which has always been the central mission of Teach NYS, to say that we are, non-public schools in New York State are 17% of the population, yet we're getting less than 1% of the funding. And so now it's non-public school students, we shut down. COVID-19 doesn't discriminate. That language is really resonating with elected officials, but we've got to continue the process of showing up when we need things and when we need to say thank you for free meals and all the other things that are happening during this process.
Well, you took my next question right out of the line, to get involved, or not just get involved, but really what you see and the educators see as the most important role that parents can play in aiding to this Teach NYS partnership of your schools. I know we spoke about legislators and relationship building, but I guess just touch on, if one of you want to touch on how important it is that it comes from the community rather than just Maury, myself, or the people on this panel.
Sure. So I'll touch on that one. And then as everyone else was talking, I was looking at the participant list for some of the others. So I'm not going to call anyone out, but I noticed before a couple of my own parents who have been big Teach NYS advocates and partners. I think when, and Sydney can attest to this, we kind of developed in the first year kind of what the picture perfect Teach NYS hosted political Yeshivah Flatbush tour would look like. And that always had a bunch of different elements. Obviously, there was a tour. There was student interaction. We usually had them meet with some middle school student leadership group. We would have them meet with some of our STEM teachers because obviously the STEM initiative has been one of the topics we've been talking about. And almost every visit, maybe everyone, has always been a parent. And because I think they bring a different element to the conversation. As an admin or as a teacher, we could talk about the school, we could talk about what we're trying to achieve, but when the politicians hear it from a parent who is living it now with their children, and thank God in our school we have a huge amount of parents who are actually alumni of our own school and can speak about the kind of the multiple generations within the school. It's even an added level where they bring in so much to it. So I think, for parents who are on this call, I think getting involved in your school partnerships is a huge way of really building this partnership that I think we could all do even more of.
Thank you. And we're right at that 7 o'clock mark, but we've covered a lot tonight. We explored the challenges and adaptations to virtual learning. We heard how these schools and others are going to be best prepared. We dived into the importance of government funding and how Teach NYS is a driving force to get that work done. And that while our call are really the ones making it happen, we as a community and those watching have to step in and really play a vital role in making those relationships happen. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I do want to give it over to our panelists for one final close that they have. And then I know we have one question that came in and we'll ask it. And then if there's any other questions, you can obviously email it to us. But I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time, but I do want to give you all the floor one last time, and we'll start with Raizi.
Sure. So I think a common theme that has echoed in everyone's remarks is a theme of partnership. right? And all of the concentric circles in which that has been enhanced during this difficult time. I'm thinking of our parents who sit at home with their children on Zoom, participating in classes in ways that they never did before. It resulted in one of the more humorous emails I've ever gotten from a parent. She concluded by saying, "And by the way, you've been lying to me all these years. My children are not a pleasure to have in class." But just, you know, this idea of the boundaries shifting and the walls between coming down, that in many ways this time of distance has brought us closer together. And that I so hope that when we talk about what we'll take with us, that will be something core, you know, that we do. And I want to, again, thank Teach NYS for your support of each individual school, support of this community building amongst us, and supporting our broader community to be the strongest and best it can be. Thank you.
I'll say that first, I had a parent call me and apologize for all the stupid phone calls she had made over the years when she realized now what really, really is important. So I hope she remembers that. There's a power to Zoom that I would love to, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and it hasn't coalesced in my brain yet in a way that I can articulate. But when we have a Zoom simcha in school now, everyone's there. When we did bar mitzvahs and things like that in the spring, everyone's there equally. Grandma and grandpa from Coral Gables, and the cousins from Haifa, and the people from Great Neck, and everyone's equally in that experience, as opposed to when I was just right before this, I was actually at a wedding, watching a live stream of a wedding, and I'm here in my dress like this, and they're all there, and I feel part of it, but I feel that distance. What can we do to preserve that, everyone being equally in it? I think is something that is a challenge for us, and something that we can rise to, because that's been incredibly powerful for me over these past couple months. Because when we say that we're all in this together, we really are all in this together. But again, I'm confident that we can power through. It's going to be an amazing year. Teach NYS, you have been incredible supports throughout, and I know you will continue to be.
And I would just add that kind of one of the ingredients to the radical flexibility I mentioned before is I would just ask parents and staff just to think, you know, there's no doubt that teachers and principals and administrators and every part of every school have been working literally for months to plan for the first day of school, and for the first weeks of school. And I think we've done a lot of great planning. And at the same time, I think we all know that not every plan is going to go exactly as we had planned. We all have different arrivals and dismissals, and will bus happen and will bus not happen. All the things that are so easy for a typical parent to get frustrated over, and as well as a principal to get frustrated over. So I just think it's really important to just kind of put out there and say that we all know that everyone, from parents to staff, everyone is doing everything that we can to get everyone back into school safely and productively. And God willing, it's going to be a great year, and we will be in school, and just have a little bit of extra patience with each other. And I think it'll allow us to get things moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that two very quick things. Number one is that when you hear the educators on this call and you hear their passion, you hear what they believe in and what they do, it's very easy for us to do our jobs because it gives us a kick and a push. And I can see the big smiles on our incredible staff, Sydney and Emily and Joseph and all the other people who our activists know. They work harder and harder whenever they hear the stories and they interact with these educators. And one of the greatest privileges that we have is that we don't just get to interact with politicians who are always a lot of fun, but we get to interact with educators who inspire us every day. So I just want to say that it's again a privilege, and you can see why we fight as hard as we do. And that's the first reason. The second reason is because I believe that you can train anybody to be political activists, and it's a testament to the fact that they're all so well versed in politics and elected office, and they're so well versed that Rabbi Dr. Jeffrey Coburn has a copy of The Power Broker sitting on his office there, and I think he has an LBJ biography as well. But I think, yes, he does. So he has not one but two Robert Caro books, who's a leading political biographer in the country. And if in his busy time, he has the ability and time to do that, really, there's no excuse for our activists not to be stepping up.
Oh, finally, they got noticed.
Thank you to all of our panelists and to Sydney for being an awesome moderator tonight. We do have one question that I quickly want to answer from Alex Luxembourg, who asked, what can parents say to their kids in terms of preparing to go back to school, and how do we frame the changes positively? So whoever wants to take that, go for it, and then we will close it out.
Raizi, he's my parent, so you answer.
Okay, it is a terrific question, and I think asking it is very much an act of thoughtful parenting. Children osmotically absorb our mood. It could be articulated, it could be inchoate. They feel how we are feeling, and especially younger children, they mirror how we are feeling. And I hope that what you heard from your awesome professional leader, Rabbi Coburn, on this call, and from Rabbi Rothman, and from them reassurance about our confidence in the reopening and being able to do so with joy and enthusiasm and excitement for the year ahead. And that if you could internalize that and articulate that to your child in both the spoken and the unspoken, I feel confident that your child will carry that with him or her into the school building and into the year ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us today. Like I mentioned, we've heard a lot from our panelists and from Sydney about what we can do to make sure that we're involved and getting everything we need for our non-public schools to keep Jewish education in the forefront of our legislators' minds and to be successful in the future. Once again, if you have any questions that we weren't able to answer tonight, please feel free to email them to me, and I will make sure to pass them along to our panelists and get them answered. I know they are eager to make sure that all parents and communities feel comfortable sending their kids back to school and safe, and making sure their children are safe. Also, I want to give a quick major mazel tov to Rabbi Coburn, as his daughter's getting married this weekend, I believe, and that is a great simcha in this crazy time of COVID. But mazel tov to you and your family. Before we leave, I just wanted to reiterate again how important our relationships with our legislators are. As you heard from all of our panelists, it's through the work that we've done meeting with our legislators that they were able to get what they needed and accomplish what they needed in a timely fashion. And if you or you know someone who is interested in joining our network, please again feel free to reach out to me and pass along their info, or ask any questions you might have about the best way to get involved and help your schools out. And with that, again, one last thank you to everyone, and I hope you have a great night and a great start to your school year.